Good morning and welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell, and this podcast goes deep into the collision of big tech
And the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative journalist.
And I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week, we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light. So, welcome and good morning. One of the biggest topics in media and tech today is how the world handles the 300-year-old law of copyright in the AI future. Now, this is a thorny one, so we brought an expert on to talk about it. At the end of the day, the questions are really fundamental. Who owns what when AIs can create unique content? Is it stealing when an AI learns from human creativity? And who owns everything that's already published on the open web? Is it for anyone to use or for any AI to use? Or do those who made it get the final say? Tech reckons pretty clearly, and it's made its case very strongly, that it should be allowed to use anything and everything to get us to the future faster. Content creators reckon that's theft, basically. And then they're threatening a full-on content war, and it could get really bloody. But ultimately, it boils down to two things. People want to create, okay? And who should get paid for that? And if people don't get paid for it, might it mean that we don't get as much creativity in the future, which feels like a bad outcome for everybody? And all of this is changing the web we've known, and a new digital era is emerging. No question, AI is changing the future for all of us. Now, this topic, in the past few days, there's been a landmark court ruling that's come down on the side of content creators. The global news agency, Reuters, sued an AI startup, arguing that their content had been taken to create a new and unique AI startup. The judges come down on Reuters' side, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And then after we've talked about that, we're going to talk about the impact it might have on licensing in the future, and what it means for the future of search, the future of AI, the next generation of human creation. It's massive. So it's a big topic. So we've decided to bring a huge brain on to join us today. So Peter Csathy has worn just about every hat in the media, entertainment, and tech worlds. He began his career as an entertainment and IP lawyer, and he then became a senior executive at Universal Studios, negotiating licensing deals worth more than $4 billion. Since then, he's built and sold several tech companies and now works as the linchpin in negotiations between global media companies and the AI giants. Welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So it's a big topic.
But we're going to solve it all.
We're going to solve it all, yeah. So a good place to start is copyright. What is it? Give us a detail. What is it, and why does it matter so much?
Well, I think that, Ricky, you and I talked about it a little bit the other day, and the way you said it kind of said it best, that copyright is if you create something, if you make something, you have the exclusive ability to be able to monetize it.
Exactly. But that's worked for how long? How long has this law been around?
Well, copyright in some form, you mentioned 300 years, so I'll take that. It's been around forever because it's driven by public policy, something that you alluded to, which is there's society wants to create a system that rewards creativity and innovation. And that's what drives copyright, to give the creator incentives to be able to create and exclusively monetize so that there is more incentive to continue to create more. And that's for the good of society, because then you do have new original works that will entertain you, thrill you, inform you, all of that.
100%. And so I presented recently on stage and I was asked about, people just don't care about content anymore. AI is going to be the future. Yeah. And my reaction was that if you go back to the dawn of human civilization, okay, the very first thing that someone thought around the campfire when they looked up at the stars was they turned to the person next to them and just kind of asked why. What is that? Tell me about it. And all of human society has been based on communication and creativity to explain these things, from cave drawings to generative AI. These are all human creations. And it's what makes the web that we live in the world we live in, so wonderful. To your point, I can see while we're talking that you've got guitars in the background, and Alan, you're a musician as well, right? And both of you care very much about creating beautiful things. I care about creating good writing. And yet, here we are having a conversation about something as fundamental as, do we own the thing we created? So what were your thoughts about that? Because I want to move on to this Reuters case. But first of all, Alan, let me ask you, what's your thoughts about what effectively copyright and creativity means for humanity? How valuable is it?
Well, let me first say, as a musician, I've sort of resigned myself to the fact that most of us, even people far more successful than me, are just not going to be able to make what they deserve for the creation of their art. It's unfortunate, but that's sort of the reality. However, we do have several hundred years of precedent that says if you write a song, you have some ownership interest in that song, so that if Ricky decides to do the Ricky Sutton version of this hit song, that Ricky Sutton has to pay me in order, and there's a complicated licensing system set up. But the idea is that you get some credit for having performed the song, and I still get some credit for having written the song, and that's fair.
Well, and I think that's right. By the way, I'm a killer on Green Day on karaoke, just so you know. For the next time I'm in New York, we'll have to go do that.
Okay, we're going to check that out.
So, Peter, this court case, the reason.
Well, let me just touch upon what you guys were talking about, because this gets into, before even getting into the court case, if you kind of start a little bit meta at a high level, ultimately, of course, we're seeing that generative AI can churn out creativity in air quotes. So it can create and generate novel songs, meaning that they're in the music world, let's say, that there's songs that you haven't heard before. So they're novel in that sense, but are they truly original? So it gets to the fundamental questions of the evolution of art and true originality and something that people haven't really seen before or heard before. When we get into that. So before even getting into the copyright issues, you have almost the existential issues that surround artists and what it means to create. And certainly one thesis that I ascribe to is something that Rick Rubin, the great music producer, talks about in his book on creativity, which is what certainly algorithms and LLMs can generate something. But what truly makes something original and divine from a human sensibility is the human experience, of course, and all the fallibility that goes with it, all the lack of precision. It's the mistakes, the little mistakes, and the little micro decisions that go along the way. So AI may be much more eloquent than I am saying the sentence, but it could not predict, because I can't predict precisely what word I'm going to say next, which makes my presentation, for good or for bad, something truly unique.
Yeah, thank you. And that is important. So since the very early days of AI, and all the way back to the dawn of cybernetics, okay, and a guy called Norbert Wiener that came up with all this stuff and figured this out, the very first thing he says in his first book is that this has to be a merger of technology and art. There has to be humanity in the machine, okay? Otherwise, we lack the piece that makes it important, which is empathy. And in a lot of the conversations that I have with AI companies, they're not really focused on that they're building it for humans. They're focused on they're building it for money, okay? And the problem is that the thing that makes the internet lovely, and I use that word I really mean that word, because I do care passionately about the internet. I think it's the greatest, development of my life, is that it's the place where I can discover things that I didn't know I knew, or I needed to know, or I wanted to know, or things that affect me emotionally. Okay. And I don't want everything to be created by a machine, because it doesn't feel it's the same. It's the difference between a beautiful piece of fruit and a Pop-Tart, right? These are two different things. And so I think that we have to protect this. And I understand why there's so much emotional pushback from the creative industries to try and ensure that it's protected and saved.
But also, isn't it really about just ensuring that there's some ability to make a living? I mean, the thing that's sort of forgotten in a lot of these discussions is like, great, you've got AI, and the AI is now cannibalizing the original content creators. But at some point, you run out of original content creators because all of them are driving cabs right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's exactly right. And so the creative community is, let's face it, I've been in the business, media, entertainment world for, 35 years. And we've seen the transformation that comes from new technologies. We've seen this movie before with the internet hitting before, streaming coming on first in the music side and then ultimately. So we see the transformation, and the media and entertainment business is always worried about dislocation and jobs lost and those kind of economics, as it should be. And historically, new jobs have been created. So that has been, I don't know if it's been a wash or whatever. I don't want to even get there. But this is a very different sort of animal in terms of scale of it. And we see that happening already in the music industry that you've been talking about. You're a musician, where you have AI generated works that are flooding the market. They're flooding it. And so now if you are an established creator that has an established following, you're probably okay, because your followers are still going to want to hear the real thing. They're going to want to hear you. You have a personality. They want to see you. They want to hear you. But if you may be the most talented musician who could have broken out, 5 years ago, but if the zone is being flooded with all these AI generated works, breaking out is a very different proposition. And so you're absolutely right that and artists of all stripes are understandably concerned about it all. But that gets to the question of, okay, what do we do about it? Because this is not going away. And that gets into some of the things, Ricky, that you want to talk about, of course.
Yeah, I just have one more point here, though. So I don't really care about AI-infused music in the same way that I didn't really care about sampling way back in the day. At some point, it stops being flavor of the month. Some will use it in a way that is creative and is artistic. I'm less worried about that. And if the whole world just wants to hear, the AI version of the Gin Blossoms, then go for it. What bothers me is that as a content creator, is that the business around that is such that we get less and less. That's the thing I want to focus about, because that to me is the real societal problem. If everybody in the world thinks that, AI Britney Spears is cool, I'm down with that. But there needs to be a viable path for content creators to be able to make a living.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I'm in violent agreement about that. I absolutely believe that, I'm pretty vocal. I'm one of the loudest voices out there in media and entertainment land about the need for rights holders to be compensated in this new world which isn't going away, which is only accelerating, where AI is scraping their works for training purposes, and to compete against them. And sure, it can be used in positive ways as a tool to enhance creativity, but there's also a very significant use case to compete against the creative community without paying them. And so absolutely, I think that, and I consider that to be theft if there's no consent and compensation. And we'll get into the legalities about it, but I also think there's a moral, ethical component of it. And that's why when companies only train on licensed works, it's called ethically sourced AI. And I think that's going to be an increasingly important tagline for service providers to differentiate themselves in the AI world.
Yeah, I like that. Ethically sourced AI. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about this court case, because I think that this is, in your view, Peter, you're quite strongly of the view that this is the start of the fight back. This is the beginning of a change of direction. Can you give us the outline of what happened, who sued who, for what, and what you think the implications of that are?
Yeah, I mean, at a very high level, you had Thomson Reuters, which creates, I think it's Westlaw books that are used by lawyers, for their research purposes, things like that. And they have a certain way of laying it out. And so there's a lot of money and resources and time and history involved in what West created with its brand and how they present legal cases for purposes of research from lawyers. And you had a company called Ross Intelligence, which I believe they actually even tried to license the content from Westlaw, so from Thomson Reuters, but Thomson Reuters said no. And so what Ross Intelligence did is they essentially took some of these works, which the court considered to be copyrighted works, put it in the sausage factory of an LLM to spit out a competitive product. And so the question to compete directly with Westlaw and this research tool for lawyers. And so what the court ultimately decided as a matter of law, even though the case isn't over, but the court on what they call summary judgment, so that's even before a case getting to a jury, ruled as a matter of law, meaning that there's no factual disputes about it, that this taking of Thomson Reuters works, which it considered to be copyrightable works, and then using it for training purposes without consent and without compensation, that's considered to be an infringement and there's no defense from what we call in the United States a fair use perspective. And fair use is a construct with a 4-part test. It's statutory, it's all that. But it's the defense that's always used in these kind of cases where you have a media company or a publisher saying that the generative AI company scraped, took in all this content for training purposes without consent and compensation. So the grand debate in the US and elsewhere under different monikers is whether that is a taking that is defensible as a fair use, or whether it's an infringement that requires a remedy of some kind and damages, that sort of thing. So this is the first court case in the United States that ruled as a matter of law on the issue, and it ruled in favor of the publisher, so the media company, the content rights holder. And that's why it's so important.
All right, let's talk about fair use. Just before we get to fair use, by the way, I headlined the Reuters AGM in London this time last year, and they alluded to this on stage. They were talking about the fact that they were involved in a big project that they thought would be a scene setter for this space. So it's interesting to see it come full circle to here. Let's talk about fair use, okay? Because I saw somebody describe me as a flamethrower this morning because I had some fairly strong opinions. I have some really strong opinions about fair use. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to say about fair use, and let's talk about it, is that copyright says what we said it says. It means that if you make it, you choose how you use it. And that's really clear. It's been around for 300 years since the court of Queen Anne in England, right? So that's fairly stuck. It's been stuck and safe for a long, long time. When the internet started, America decided to mess with the 300-year-old law. Okay, and they introduced this new doctrine that they called fair use. And the logic, please fill me in, Peter, on the detail if you choose, but basically the logic of fair use was you can use stuff and not worry about copyright as long as it makes the industry as a whole, the internet or whatever industry you're in, bigger, better, make more money. It's a very American expansionist view of the world. Let's give people all the tools and make the economy and make more money. That feels great. It's the American dream. But the problem is that fair use only exists in America. That law doesn't exist anywhere else. And if you look at how that breaks down, the whole argument for fair use is we couldn't have search without it. If Google had to get the rights permission of every single person for every single search result forever, we'd never have had search. And I think most people think search is a great thing. Ergo, the logic is, well, fair use is fine then. That seems to work, okay? Until someone just rips off your entire history of your content from the entire open web or copies it in an AI world and just says, oh, it's the same thing, it's fair use. then it doesn't work anymore because you're basically undermining the entire creative industries. And for me, the publishing industry completely. Fair use makes no sense to any publisher at all, anywhere in the world. No publisher takes the entire content of its rival and republishes it and argues fair use. And any publisher that tried to do that would be laughed out of court, but tech companies are able to use it again and again and again and again. So it doesn't seem to be a level playing field, and it doesn't seem to be an enabler for the creative industries. So fair use, for me, is one of two laws that completely chop the legs off the news industry. The other one being Section 230, and we'll talk about that another time, and immunity for stuff that platforms publish. But fair use is brutal to the publishing and the creative industries. Peter, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, fair use has been around for a long time. It was statutorily implemented, but as a concept, it's been in the U.S. for, I don't even know how long, but for a long, long time. Pre-internet, and then it was statutorily created by Congress, and there's a 4-part test. Here's the thing. Fair use is a very squishy sort of analysis. So there's 4 factors that come into play, but different courts can read the facts before it and come up with different conclusions to it. But I think fundamentally, at least where things have evolved, even with this crazy Supreme Court that we have in the United States, where the most recent fair use case was involving the artist Andy Warhol and his foundation, and it involved a Prince print. That I'm not going to get Prince the artist, a print, a graphic print. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. But ultimately, the ultimate rationale was the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the artist, in that case, the plaintiff, and ruled against the Andy Warhol Foundation that was relying upon the fair use defense, primarily because it found a market substitution. So a direct commercial harm that was coming to the plaintiff artist, creator. And so fair use, again, this is ultimately copyright is driven by the public policy that we talked about at the beginning. And so fair use is a squishy concept that tries to reach some kind of reasonable accommodation between what an artist needs from an incentive standpoint to be able to create and for the good of society, while at the same time giving the ability for the rest of society to be able to borrow or build on top of or do that sort of thing. But it's a squishy concept, and if you want to, Alan, you may have some other thoughts about that too before I get into some of the more specifics.
Yeah, so I agree that it's squishy. In the Warhol case, I think what really set it apart was that there was a very specific market. Both Andy Warhol and Lynn Goldsmith, the photographer who took the picture of Prince, were both competing for magazine cover artwork. I mean, it was a very, very narrowly, and I think because of that, that's what tipped the scales. But even there, very split Supreme Court, really hard to decide these things because to your point, it is rather fuzzy. I do want to at least acknowledge.
Interestingly, 7-2 to decision though, 7-2 with the conservatives coming on board, and so it was one of the rare ones where you had 2 of the most liberal justices be on opposite sides of the fence.
Yeah, fascinating how that one turned out. I do want to at least acknowledge that culturally there is some value to fair use. As a musician, as we went from my dad's era with bebop jazz, as you then get into the rock and roll world, and then you get into the indie rock world, and then you get into the hip hop world. There was so much borrowing. Now, some of it was stealing, and this is where this becomes really difficult because there was certainly a fair amount of stealing. But culturally, if I can't be influenced by how wonderfully Peter plays the guitar, then we're sort of missing something, because there's something to that. The best musicians I've ever played with will openly acknowledge that they've pulled a tiny piece from every single person that they've worked with ever, and that makes them who they are. And so, that's fair use. That's that, and there's some value to keeping that.
Yeah, I wrote about this, and I was just having a debate with somebody earlier today about this precise issue. Here's the fundamentally different thing between it. I always hear this argument, that what AI is doing, training, so learning so that it can generate something novel, not wholly original, but novel, is the same thing. What's the difference between that and Alan as musician doing what he just described, which is, I heard that Neil Young song, I'm inspired by it, and it may kind of have some little elements to it, but he's building on top of it. Here's the fundamental difference, that Alan is not creating a whole system that can serve millions upon millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people. That's the goal of the AI companies, with a system that enables them to generate all this creative in quotes again, this work that's been enabled by the scraping of the world of copyrighted works that finds itself on the internet. Alan hasn't created a system of this. And let's face it, so Alan isn't trying to compete directly with Neil Young. He's not trying to. But when these systems that are being created by the big tech companies, their whole purpose is they want to be the sole place for all of us to go, whatever we want. If we want to get the most recent news story and we want to have it summarized for us, if we want to have a graphic generated, if we want a song generated, if we want to be able to make a movie in the future, you're going to be able to make feature-length movies. We're almost there now with AI works. So they want to be the one-stop shop for all generation, whatever that may be. And that's a fundamentally different value proposition. So this is where it ties into like what the Supreme Court was saying. No question, fundamentally different concept or context when we're talking about an individual photographer. But it's this squishy concept of fair use that comes into play that is meant to apply to all kinds of contexts. And that's why it's squishy. Here, the direct rationale of market substitution comes into play. So even though it's a very different context, it's the same rationale. And I'll give a specific example without getting in the weeds. So if a media company has a catalog of videos that are being scraped by, pick your LLM of choice, then that LLM of choice has not sought the consent of that media company or paid that media company anything. It has taken an opportunity for that media company to be able to monetize the training value it gives itself. And there is an established market, and I'm directly involved in it. There is an established market for licensing media libraries for the training of their LLMs. And so as an example, News Corp had a $250 million AI licensing deal. So this is direct competition. If somebody goes out and trains on media content, which is my world, media and entertainment content, they're doing it and they're taking direct opportunities away from the media companies and the artists, by the way. There's a whole question about whether their individual rights are impacted outside of the copyright issues with just privacy and biometrics and all that kind of stuff.
Peter, damn right. So, and this becomes much more important when you look at your newsroom and you've got a story that you need to cover and you don't have any people to cover it. Okay. And so I often say in my negotiations and my discussions with big tech companies and acting as a go-between with publishing is I ask a fundamental question to everybody in the room. I say, do you feel safer today than you did 25 years ago? Because 25 years ago, we had a much more fearless media. We would cover a lot more. We'd be at more events. We had local newspapers keeping local people accountable, and we had national and global newspapers keeping the big guys honest. And the world has moved on a long way. 58% of all journalists in America no longer work in journalism in the last 10 years, and that's because the economics of journalism have been ending. And there's a pretty much clear substitution, to use your point, of that money that used to go to the media companies now go to the tech companies. The tech companies said they'd be enabler, but then they took the money as well. So they took the distribution, the discovery, and then the advertising. And so that's a clear case of market substitution, in my opinion. I want to talk quickly about squishy just before we get to licensing. That enrages me. I know you're right, okay, but the law's not meant to be squishy. And it's not meant to be how I feel, says the judge on a Tuesday when he couldn't find a parking space and he's feeling cranky. That's not how we should decide the entire future of the world and the economics of content creation. We need something more robust. And the whole point of having a 300-year-old law is that it's been tested through different societies, different times, different products, different evolutions, different technologies emerging. That's the whole point of case law. And if you just decide to rewrite it on a Tuesday because you feel like it, because it might be a good idea, that is really bad law. And squishy? Hell no. One judge? Oh my goodness, please no. So
yeah, but Ricky, here's the dirty little secret though. Everything's squishy until it evolves into something based on all these judges who ate their cornflakes one morning and then they said, okay, this way versus that way. And then it ultimately becomes a less squishy concept over time, but it still becomes squishy. You know, we've talked about this before, that nothing's divine from the heavens when it comes to this kind of stuff. It starts almost out of necessity, I'll talk about the U.S. courts, on the lower courts, and then it goes up to the appeal courts, and then it ultimately makes its way to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court itself is squishy depending on who's on the bench. So to your point, it'd be beautiful if there was a precise black and white sort of definition in any particular context, but there rarely is. There's always these different rationalizations when a judge comes out a certain way on something. And sometimes they truly are trying to be objective about it and weigh the facts versus the law as they read it. But there are a lot of times, as we see on the Supreme Court, where there's a predetermination. And so you can make a rationalization out of anything.
Yeah. So just, Alan, sorry, just while I'm just on my rage, I'll just keep going on this one. Just because, look, you're right, absolutely, viewed from an American perspective, but that's certainly not the perspective viewed from the rest of the world. And I'm on a podcast with two Americans, but America's only 4% of the global population, okay? And I know you have an outsized influence on the entire world, but when you make a law and then change the law and make it beneficial to America and take the rest of the world down with you, that's not something that people like. And to your point, I to fully understand that the law's not black and white.
I agree, by the way. 100%.
Okay. You're not going to send someone over and lynch me. But, you know...
No, I 100% agree with you. I'm European. I'm an immigrant, so I feel you from an international perspective.
The other thing is that this idea that we create gray areas for evolving law is literally what the tech industry has driven a giant truck right through gray. Pretty much everything the tech industry has done in the last 25 years, the law around it has been gray or evolving. And they've turned that into an art form. It's not that the law has given them the opportunity to do this. I think they've gone and done whatever they've wanted and then made the law gray around them as a shield. And that's kind of what's happening here. So this court case, putting a line in the sand and saying, actually, do you know what? We're going to stand up for the content owner on this occasion and say that fair use isn't going to apply in this application of AI. That feels like it might be day one of perhaps a small pushback against what's been a relentless tide that's drowned half of the industry.
100%. I mean, look, you touched upon it where we have seen, again, in previous technological evolutions and the collision between tech and media and entertainment is that the technology bros win all the time. And so there's no mystery that all of a sudden you have multi-trillion-dollar companies that have built much of their value on the backs of the rights holders, the creative community. YouTube is an example, which is, it started with copyright infringement and ultimately had to roll it back because of litigation. And then there was a system of payment that was created for it. So, it's impossible for the creative community to be able to envision what the world of technology will be like because they're not in the belly of the beast. They don't see it coming until it comes. Same with governments. They can't control it. The regulators don't know how to regulate it because they have to do things after the fact. And so those who are driving the change will always be the winners in that kind of game. That's the way it is. It's not, whether it's fair or not, it's kind of irrelevant. It is what it is. So what can we do about it now as the creative community? And I believe that the Warhol case is significant for those reasons that you mentioned, which is it's drawing a line in the sand using a certain rationale. And the judge who just rejected fair use in this Thomson Reuters case used that same rationale to reject fair use. But we're still in the very beginnings of this evolution there. And then one more thing I want to touch upon. When you said that there's even within tech, there may be a feeling that, yeah, of course, we're infringing copyrights. They may not think it's a black and white thing, but we may likely be infringing, but we don't know for sure because no courts have ruled in this particular context.
Oh,
we saw that happen with Meta, which is, it's a very notorious story that the New York Times broke, where when Zuckerberg was first starting to tell his executive teams to really accelerate, put the feet on the gas to catch up when it came to AI and ChatGPT, they were telling him there was resistance internally saying, well, there's copyrighted works and all this, we should go out and license it. And ultimately, Mark Zuckerberg made the decision in the face of all that real concern by at least a subset of the people, the executives within Meta. He made the decision to move forward and just go fast and break things. And that's that's not unusual.
Yeah, a lot of these things made some sense in the beginning, even with the search issue. And I know, Ricky, you don't like it, and I've come around to your way of thinking with that. But at least that was a deal. It was a crappy deal, but there was a deal in exchange for search traffic. If you do the right things by your user base and you treat your users with respect, we will effectively reward you with traffic, and you'll use that traffic to monetize your content. All right, I at least kind of get that. But we've pulled one of the legs out of the stool, and everybody's wondering why the stool isn't standing up anymore.
Yeah, I mean, look, one thing about search, at least there's a rationale in search cases where, and it's a credible rationale, that search enables a vast new ocean of potential readers, let's say, for your publication who never otherwise would have known about it. So you have global search, you're looking for a certain kind of story, and you get linked to all these different news sources. So there's at least a credible market amplification sort of rationale to it. And there's a direct monetization path, whether it's a satisfactory one or not, but there's a direct monetization path because somebody's then going over to your website, et cetera, et cetera. Here, just today or yesterday, there was a breaking story about what prompt-based search does. Prompt-based search, like ChatGPT, we've all used it. You get your nice little summary, and it's pretty satisfying to get one answer. And you see a few little sources that are in tiny print at the bottom. But this new study by a company called Tollbit, Tollbit, which is a hot startup in the United States that's in this world, it reported that 96% less traffic goes to publications when using prompt-based search. 96% less than with traditional search. So the economic impact of that, unless there's some change in the economics of prompt-based search, will be devastating.
Not to mention that users are not getting accurate information as often as not. I mean, it's fine for like sports scores and those types of things, but if you're dealing with, again, a squishy issue, to get one answer is just disingenuous because there isn't just one answer.
Yeah, and so the traffic to publishers, professional publishers from Google Search, since they introduced AI Overviews, the AI answer engine that they've got, is down 40%. And so I had a really interesting conversation with Google about this, where I was basically saying to them, look, if you continue to diminish the traffic to content creators, especially in the news industry, then they're going to stop covering the news. And if they stop covering the news, how are you going to be able to provide an honest or an accurate response to an event occurring? What you're going to cause is chaos. And they said to me, Ricky, what you have to appreciate and they say this to me a lot, and it really gets under my skin. They said, look, Ricky, what you have to appreciate is that we already know what the future is going to be. We're working years ahead. We already know where this is going to be. And I said, okay, well, what's the biggest story in the world next Thursday then? Yeah. What's it going to be if you're such a genius? Okay. And we had this conversation not long before the Ukraine invasion. Yeah. And I remember thinking the minute the invasion happened in Ukraine, my immediate response was they didn't know that was happening, and nor did anybody else. And the only reason we now have coverage of it is because people were willing to cover it. And no matter how good Google's technology might be, or how grey the law might be, or how the judge feels on that particular Tuesday, the court case is up there, okay? We don't know what's going to happen in the future. And for now, we still need humans to do that. And search is useless without information to teach it.
Again, 100% for sure. That there will be, and it's evolving now in real time, in this fundamental transformation of the press, media, and entertainment. There will need to be an economic system that's worked out to be able to incentivize, pay reporters who are going to the Ukraine to be able to pick up this news, because otherwise, to your point, prompt-based search is not going to be valuable at all. You need to have credible sources. You need to have premium sources. You need to be able to support them. So there will be a system that's worked out. And I can tell you, because I'm in the belly of the beast, talking to my sensibilities are with the rights holders. I'm a media and entertainment guy through and through, but I understand technology, as I've mentioned. So I'm very loud out there, but there needs to be a solution. I've devoted my career at this point to help drive a solution that's as fair as possible. And I can tell you that being in the belly of the beast in those kinds of discussions, there is an understanding that there needs to be some kind of system to directly address what you're talking about. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a meeting of the minds, but there's an understanding that there needs to be.
All right. So this is a really good thing to end on, because the truth, I like to make complicated things really simple, because to me, they always seem simple. Okay. There is a need of people for access to information. So there is a demand for information. So the demand side of the curve exists. And there is an entire community of tech companies and publishers that want to satisfy that need. So there's also a supply side. So you have the perfect market economics of supply and demand. Okay, almost unlimited supply and demand. There's 4 billion people, and everyone in the world wants to service them. It should be Shangri-La for content creation. The issue here is that all the money is going one direction and directly to the tech companies, who are $15 trillion and rising. Google generates just under $1 million a minute in revenue. Okay, and the entire publishing industry of Australia is $200 million. This cannot make sense. And so the supply and demand economics exists, but the economic model is broken. So we need to find a place where super profits and killing everybody inside, if you're not a tech company, can't be sustainable. And so that means we need a new economic model. What are your thoughts on that, Peter? Because you're in there, you're in those negotiations. So am I. I have a million views, but I'm really interested in what you think. What's the right model, and what's emerging? Are we finally going to reach a place where the people that do the work get paid as well as the people that distribute it? We've made the paper boys the trillionaires and forgotten the journalists that wrote the paper.
Yes, I like that. 100% there needs to be, because it is going all one direction. Violent agreement with you. And I bang the drum as loudly as I can to that point. This is what I think is going to be the system. I believe there's going to be an opt-in system. And unless a creator, rights holder, opts in, I don't know what we do with the models of the past, the LLMs of the past, by the way, because there's no ability to opt in or opt out when something's already been trained. But on a going forward basis, there's going to be an opt-in system that I believe is going to be 3-tiered, where you look at the long tail or the full tail of creators. You have huge media companies at the kind of at one end of the tail, and then on the long tail, you have individual creators such as ourselves. And then you have mid-level companies in between. I think there's going to be direct licensing with the big media companies and the big tech companies where very large scale libraries are going to be, for some, not all are going to agree to this, will be licensed for not only training purposes, but frequently for, what they call RAG, retrieved augmented generation. I think that's what it is. For real-time information that enables real-time outputs. And then also some potentially like replicated outputs, but it's a licensing sort of model. So it's an opt-in system where there's big money exchange, hopefully a fair exchange of value for all the value that this content creates to the sausage factory. Then there's going to be a mid-level sort of tier where these individual companies are not going to be able to, media companies are going to be able to get the attention of the large players, the big tech players, but they come together, they have a consortium of some kind, and they participate in it, and they say, here, big tech company like OpenAI, here's a bucket of millions of works that you can use and license, and then there's an apportionment to the individual media companies. And then there's going to be a more automated sort of approach, and that's what that company Tollbit enables, Tollbit. I have nothing to do with it, by the way. But that's what they enable, where any rights holder can come and say, here's my stuff, here's my Substack, feel free to use it and make it available for AI. And anytime it's used, there's some sort of apportionment, like some kind of, almost like an AdSense model or like a YouTube model along those lines, where it's an automated approach. I think that's the only way it's going to be able to happen.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here because this is a bit of a specialist area for me. So what we're effectively creating with organizations like Tollbit and others is a replication of what happened in the music industry or in the radio industry, where you made sure that the artist was paid for the content that you use. But we know already through the last 8 or 9 years that all of this can be subverted and circumvented. Okay, so anything that relies on a tag or a code, the tech guys will find a way to silence that. And they're not going to play nice. I guarantee to you they will not play to nice, because they've got $15 trillion worth of value to protect. They will not play nice. And any kind of honesty system or system that assumes that technology will pass through will not happen. It will be sieved out. So I have a much more aggressive view to this, which is that if you're taking my stuff and the judge has decided that you're taking my stuff, I'm going to sue you out of existence. And if you have already an LLM, there's also an off switch. It's just over there. I've got one here for my light. I can flick that and turn it off. So you turn it off. If you stole it, you cannot profit from the crime that you committed. So it can be switched off and we start again. If AI is put back 2 years, but we create a sustainable future for the next 50 years, that's a perfectly reasonable transaction. And if they decided to take the risk by taking it, well, shit happens. You fought on the wrong side. It's a shame you lost. What I'm much more interested in is how the people that do the content creation see their value rise in line with the creation of the new AI future. No one wants to hold the future back, least of all the creative people. We all want to be involved in this new future. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that the work that we do is tagged and actually paid. And so I actually think that we create a splinter net at this point, if I'm really radical about it. I think that we have a premium content internet that is built by the creators, that has high quality content in it. And that is perhaps a paid model. It perhaps has its own technology. Perhaps all the world's publishers get behind one AI platform and kingmake it. Perhaps it's OpenAI, perhaps it's not. It's not going to be Perplexity, but it might be somebody else, might be ProRata, I don't know, somebody. And we kingmake a premium internet, and that's where all the good stuff lives. And then Google can go and create its Wild West web over there with generative AI that's all got cheap advertising in it, and people can have that. And what we create is a Walmart web and a Harrods web. And these two things are different. We've seen it happen in streaming. Okay, we've seen it happen in many different markets. It might be time to put a cleaver through the middle of the internet and let premium people go and earn money and let people pay for it on one side of the world over here, this way on the web, and have a different web over here, which I appreciate is radical. But if they're not going to play nice, then you need radical change.
I don't think it's radical at all. First of all, I love your sentiments, Ricky. I love them. I'll talk about from a U.S. perspective, although I do believe it's probably going to be the same around the world. So this is meant to be U.S. centric, but I'll just what I know. No court is going to turn off ChatGPT. I don't see it happening. I don't see an injunction happening. I just don't see that happening. Technology, it's up.
Well, they did try it in Europe. I mean, Italy effectively tried to unplug it. I think that lasted a week. Although that did last longer than the U.S. unplugging TikTok. So there's that.
Yeah, look, I love the sentiment of it. I don't see that happening. Technology, once it's out of the barn, it's going to keep going. It just is. So what can we do about it? I certainly think that, and let's not also forget that even the biggest media company in the world has small fraction of the resources necessary from a legal perspective to be able to compete against any one of these massive players that's going to bury them in court just from a sheer cost perspective. So what can be done? I think you're exactly right when we look at differentiation. So it's what you said about being a kingmaker kind of ties in what I mentioned, ethically sourced AI at the very beginning when we started talking. I absolutely believe that being an ethically sourced means that you're only training and utilizing licensed content where you're paying the creators. I think that's going to be a big differentiator that's going to be used to and will be a trusted source because of it, because it's using trusted sources, right? So like news or whatever. 100%, I think that's right. And I guess it's kind of analogous to what we saw on the music streaming side, where the bad Napster, the original Napster, came in and immediately anybody could download a song for free. It was a horrible experience, but people did it, and it decimated the music industry. So what was the way to combat it? Apple came in, and by the way, I ran the first on-demand music streaming company. That's what brought me down to San Diego. That's another story. But I was in this world, right in the belly of the beast of this transformation, where we were the first legitimate on-demand music service where we licensed the content, we paid for it. We provided a better experience than the free stuff out there. And that's what Steve Jobs did with iTunes. And so the economics are not satisfying. I get that. Like, they're not as satisfying as they should be for the music world or whatever, but they were competing against free. And so the best way to do that is a better experience, something that's licensed. And that kind of a story, it's a trusted source for your music. You're not going to get crappy, corrupted files, all that kind of stuff. Same thing, same rationale, I think, should apply here of how we're looking at AI, where there's a lot of crap out there. So the best way to compete against that is to rattle the sabers through litigation so that we do what we can through litigation, but that's not going to be all you can do. You have to then try to work out licensing schemes and then support those systems, those services that are ethically sourced.
Okay, I have a couple of thoughts here. First, I like Ricky's approach. And the reason I like Ricky's approach is that you're sort of following a little bit the Spotify model, where the reason that Spotify gained success is that they were able to co-opt the record companies. They gave them a whole bunch of money. They got them onto Team Spotify. And here we are. Now, Spotify, I have a whole bunch of issues with. I'm not here to say it's anywhere resembling fair to artists, but it is better than the alternative, which I guess is nothing. The thing that nobody talks about, what drives copyright, at least in creative industries, is enforcement. In the music industry back in the day, you had guys with crooked noses who would come into your office and knock you around if you got out of line. In movies, you had a little bit of that, but you also had Disney literally suing everybody out of existence. So what I like about Ricky's idea is that if you kingmake, you have a shot at having somebody who's at least close to the level of power as an OpenAI or some of the other tech giants. And if you're able to amass that, I think you got a shot. I'm not even sure you win, but at least there you've got a puncher's chance.
I think we're all in violent agreement about that. It's that it's not only is it the right thing for a company who's in this world to be only utilizing licensed content, but it's in their self-interest from a differentiation, standing apart from all the crap out there. I believe that is going to be the winner for all these reasons. And like you said, Ricky, going back to the Ukraine thing, unless you have those trusted sources who need to be paid to be able to provide it, then we're going to have nothing but untrustworthy stuff out there and just a broken internet. So
yeah. Do you know, funnily enough, there's an AI in the word fair. I think that's just basically the sensible thing here. I'm just going to kind of leave you with this. The ability for the news industry, and I talk to them all the time, to take control here is a decision that takes 3 seconds. They choose through their APIs to release their content to the open web. Okay, so they are the ones, they choose to publish their content on the open web, and they know that once it's on the open web, the AI companies take it and use it. And so they're trying to defend something they're choosing to do. If you took all of your money and left it in a duffel bag outside the bank on the street, you can't be unhappy the following morning if the money's not there anymore. The sensible thing to do is to put the money in the bank. That's what the bank is for. What the news industry does is it releases all of its content to the open web through open AIs to appear in Google search, which made sense 10, 15 years ago, but it doesn't make sense anymore. And the ability for any publisher to turn off its API is a decision that can be taken in a heartbeat that would mean that all of those AIs would immediately go dark on any future information around breaking news. The news industry has the control and the ability and the need to change this economy. It doesn't need laws. It can just decide to stop the supply. Now, that obviously has repercussions, okay? But if it has a plan B, and if it had King made its own AI, and it redirected its APIs from Google to them, then suddenly that API would be the true power, or that AI company would be the true powerhouse of content discovery. So I think that we're reaching a revolutionary point. But for now, the courts are going to play their games, and we're going to see what happens. But I hope that someone has the courage to make a move like that. All right. Well, look.
Amen.
Yeah. Do you know, that's not what the media companies tell me when I go and say that to them. They generally just say, can you please remove this man from the building and lock him out? But I still think it's where we need to go.
You sound pretty reasonable to me, man.
Yeah, but the challenge there, though, is, look, I'm certainly, I want to be at least somewhat sympathetic. You've got guys who are on the back nine of their career who are trying to eke out another 3 to 5 years of a good salary, and you're pitching them revolution. and you may be right. I believe you're right, but I can see from their perspective, if you're wrong 20%, they're out on their butts in 3 months. And when you got kids in college, you make different decisions, and they're going to keep procrastinating until they have nothing.
All three of us have been leaders. Leaders need to lead. And if you're not the right leader to lead for the future that's ahead of you, you need to leave and find somebody who is. That's just the way it is.
I love it, Ricky.
All right, good. Let's do it. Thanks very much, gentlemen. I've really enjoyed today. Look, I no doubt we're all going to reconvene. This space isn't going away anytime soon. Thank you for your time. Peter, thanks for coming on. Really appreciated it.
Yeah, great to be here, guys.
Thanks, Peter.
I enjoyed it. See you guys.
Let's keep in touch. All right. Speak to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.